Happy New Year, Alex Jones, and Happy New Year, fellow info warriors. We got to start with the Epstein info. What are we actually going to get? Now, I've got to admit, my journey into Jeffrey Epstein actually began with Infowars.com well over a decade, closer to a decade and a half ago, when the Florida story started to break and people realized that this quote-unquote billionaire had been trafficking in young girls, women, and maybe even beyond. But we're not going to get there yet because I've really done mega research on the documentation that is out there. And I don't think that there's anything brand new coming out in the sense that we're going to see new documentation. I'll go over why. What we are going to see is unredacted names of documents that have been around now for 3, 4, 5.
And Jason, let me just interrupt. And I'm going to skip both network breaks to get your time back and more. But you're absolutely right. What we're going to get is unredacted from the client list, but X is there now. It's not as censored as it was. So now we're like, we already know all this, but the general public doesn't. So it's kind of like a kid not knowing Santa Claus is real, and the adults know. We're about to find out Santa Claus isn't real. What's big is that it's all breaking big. Sorry, go ahead.
No, absolutely. You know, Alex, I'm glad you're here because there's so much that's already publicly available that I think that people really have to understand. For instance, in the Ghislaine Maxwell case itself, let's take a look at this, guys, because this is so important. What we really got was confirmation that Jeffrey Epstein literally had hard drives full of videos that were never entered into evidence other than their pictures.
Right. That's
as
the
exhibits.
sex videos. That's the real blackmail the FBI got.
Absolutely. And look, here we have burned DVDs and CDs that are labeled. Again, we didn't get to see what was on them. They were even blacking out in what was publicly available paintings that were there. However, here's really the coup de grace. You want a quote-unquote client list. Well, it goes well beyond that. What you're looking at are binders that are blacked out that more than likely have compromised individuals and photographs of those individuals. And that's just scraping the surface. Inside the safe that they found, we had Jeffrey Epstein with a passport under a different name and a Saudi Arabian address. This is somebody that has really been involved in the quote-unquote deep state network for decades upon decades. So when we're talking about a quote-unquote client list, what we really are talking about are associates, individuals that are indeed compromised, video evidence we will probably never get, and now a bunch of different names will be redacted. Well, I'd also like to remind people that when a lot of these documents were coming out, there were names that were indeed named. So 3.5 years ago, I did a video, over 70 witnesses named in documents. And on the air, we read those names. And there are certainly already people of interest that need to be discussed, such as Leslie Groff and Sarah Kalin, who by all means were hardcore associates and perhaps minions of, I want to be very careful here, of Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein when it came to regards of what? The individuals that were actually being trafficked. No charges have ever been brought against those. In those documents, separate people that worked within the house were also named. So, you know, I think that a lot of the names that are already out there, whether they be George Mitchell, Glenn Dubin, Bill Richardson, who passed this
by
year.
the way, Jason, I'm going to punch out listening while I eat lunch, but you're on target here, and I'm glad you bring this up. The videotapes, the safes, the FBI, you should go through that. I know you were. That is, well, we're chasing lists and flight logs. That's a distraction from what the FBI needs to release. The videotapes. They need to release the blackmail footage. That's really what was going on here. These people knew they were coming to do this as a ritual to be part of the club, whereas other mafias make you kill somebody so they can trust you and control you and have dirt on you. These people make you have sex with children.
Well, absolutely. And Alex, there's another story that kind of coincides with this because we know that the FBI has been sitting on this information since the 90s when we had people come forward to them and the NYPD on Jeffrey Epstein. But think about the Wiener laptop for a second. A lot of people think that when Wiener went to jail, it was because of that laptop. That laptop has never been looked at or disclosed to the public, to my knowledge, via the FBI, the NSA, the CIA, or anybody else. And in fact, when you look at what actually happened to Anthony Weiner, what happened was the fact that you had one of his victims blow the whistle. And she is the one who provided the Skype and the Snapchats. And there she is right there. They never went into that laptop in which Huma Abedin had access. And of course, her relationship with Hillary Clinton would have been revealed even further.
Yeah, she's like the right hand lady of Hillary. And then Weiner is the protege of Chucky Schumer.
Absolutely. And what does he do? He spends less than 2 years in a country club prison. And then he's put out in the media once again, even tried to give him a podcast with Curtis Silva or Sleva of the Guardian Angels in New York City. That's how this really works, folks. And let's talk about Trump for a minute, because I know that you were concerned, for instance, that he would be on the list. These documents that we're actually talking about, first of all, I don't believe in a list, but the documents out there already named Trump. So I don't think you're going to see him come up. And what do I mean by that? Well, they named him in a way that the media has downplayed, and I'll show you these articles right here, folks, is that the unsealed documents detail Epstein's victim's recruitment at Mar-a-Lago. Well, that victim was Virginia Giuffre Roberts. And in fact, right here, you can read it. Donald Trump was also a good friend of Jeffrey's. That part is true. He did not partake in any sex with any of us, but he flirted with me. It's true that he didn't partake in any sex with us, but it's not true that he flirted with me. So she's saying that he didn't flirt with her and he didn't partake in any sex. Donald Trump never flirted with me. Then the next sentence, he'd laugh and tell Jeffrey, "You've got the life." I never said that to her. So we already know that his name is out there, but it's via the fact that he kicked Epstein out after this incident at Mar-a-Lago, where what? He was trying to recruit Giuffre Roberts and possibly others. So I don't think that he's going to be in there. RFK Jr., however, we already know he's on the flight logs. He's recently addressed.
Jason, this is so huge. I'm gonna keep listening, but I want to invite you on the show. What hour do we have open tomorrow, guys? On the main broadcast. I mean, the fourth hour is main broadcast too. Yeah, find out right now. I want you to come on and do this because, again, we know about the videotapes. I need to talk about these more. I talk about them some. You're absolutely right. The FBI got those. We have the records when they raided it. It shouldn't be where's the client list. That's what they just put together. It needs to be where are all the videotapes? What was in the houses? What was in the island, which we know the FBI went in and scrubbed it all up. So I'm going to let you know before this is over. Hell, I'm just going to choose the time. You're on at noon tomorrow, noon Central. Can you come on and do an hour with us?
Noon Central should be okay. Yes, sir.
All right, so you're good at noon tomorrow.
Yes, sir.
All right, I want to start over. Everybody's watching now anyways. I'm going to put this out on X today. When you're done, I'm going to take this and put this whole thing out. But I want you on tomorrow. That's on Wednesday, January 3rd at noon to talk about this.
And Alex, even beyond what you said, there seems to be more than one island. Okay, so he actually talks about on tape before he was arrested.
No, everything you're saying is true because I've done the research too. You're just so good at organizing it, so I can't wait. You should put a new film out about this, the definitive Jeffrey Epstein.
Jones, if I had the time, you want to do it, we'll talk about it. Because obviously InfoWars is back in a big way this year on X. I think it's extremely important, especially in this election year. And this is like an election year of no other. There's so many moving parts to this whole thing and what's going on in the globe post-COVID 1984 nightmare. But this is a big part of it because, I really believe that when you dig down deep enough into that Epstein network, what you really get to is the click from the Iran-Contra network. Because why? Epstein was close friends with Prince Andrew, and what nobody discusses about Prince Andrew is he was their #1 arms dealer. That's what he did for the royal family. He cut a bunch of arms deals. And then why would Epstein have a Saudi Arabian address and a passport freely to go there? Israel was a major component in the Iran-Contra affair. And again, there are these moving components. You were talking about it prior, where they would actually get the weapons that were smuggled via Czechoslovakia and the Ukraine, and they would ship them down. And it was then that we would ship up drugs and money and then pay them off. It's this plausible deniability circle within networks that go beyond nation states, Alex. And I know that you often talk about that. And that's why the Epstein network, which goes well beyond just Epstein, but other individuals, say in the fashion field, because Epstein has that large relationship with Les Wexner. Wexner,
and then you've got Peter Nygaard.
So big. And Peter Nygaard, getting into the eugenics aspects. In fact, on that tape I was discussing prior, it was recorded by Steve Bannon. Bannon sitting on maybe 18 hours of interviews with him, put out a short trailer that I was going to show called The Monsters, where he calls them Islands of Dr. Moreau. And then you find out that the New Mexico ranch that was never investigated, one that Bill Richardson apparently was visiting, according to these documents that we've been discussing today. That's the former governor of New York, a close Clinton associate, a CFR member. That was a quote-unquote baby-making ranch where you can see the mainline reports that what he was trying to have an island of Epstein clones or super Epsteins. You can't make this stuff up. So getting to Nygaard was just recently convicted of one of the many crimes.
He was having women bring babies to term to suck all their juices and inject them into himself. So you're gonna cover it all now. We're gonna cover it in depth tomorrow, 12 noon, Jason.
12 noon. Sounds great, Alex.
All right, see you.
All right. And folks, this Epstein story is one that has so many different aspects of it. I mean, think about what just happened to Ghislaine Maxwell. She should be serving a life sentence. And the truth of the matter is there's an appeals process. I don't think that she's going to spend the rest of her life in prison if, unfortunately, we keep the same type of infrastructure or system we currently have, because our constitutional republic has completely and totally fallen apart. This is just a highlight of that. And look, to Alex's credit, he was at the forefront of this in the late 1990s, making documentaries called America Destroyed by Design. And that is what's currently happening. And that's why we have to get the correct narrative about Epstein out there. He mentioned Nygaard. Alex was actually being really nice when he said women, because the accusations are that he was impregnating girls as young as 14, forcibly having them have abortions, then taking that aborted fetal tissue, converting it into stem cells, and having it injected into him in his quest to live forever. The ultimate transhumanist goal, and really a goal of the elites throughout history. If you think about it, the fables of the tree or fountains of youth, to live forever. And right now, we have a class of people, a predator class of people that truly believe not only that this is possible, but we are on the cusp of this technology. And that's why transhumanism has been something that has been at the focal point of my work for some time and will continue to be in the future. In fact, one of the clips that we're going to be showing today in this very important fourth hour is my question to Vivek Ramaswamy at a local town hall here in Iowa just a couple weeks ago, in which I asked him about his background in biotech in the field of xenotransplantation, which is the chimeric process of having organs, human organs, grow in other organisms such as pigs. Yes, this is not only a reality, but it's actually FDA approved through United Therapeutics. Asking him about that and how far is too far, and whether he believes the transgender movement is a pathway into the transhuman one, as I not only believe, but I think I have demonstrated time and time again. So you'll get his response to that. Then you'll get my response after the fact to that. We got to take a break in about 90 seconds. But when we come back, before we get to Vivek Ramaswamy and that town hall question, I'm going to show you this clip from Steve Bannon. I want to see this documentary, The Monsters. in which he sat down with Jeffrey Epstein on several occasions. And really, I can't speculate what they talked about other than what is in this tape. And what is in this tape is startling because he talks about not only one island, but two islands, and them being islands of Dr. Moreau. Well, that is an open reference to not only eugenics, but chimeric eugenics. In other words, the merging of human beings with animals and other types of biologies. If you haven't read the books or seen the film, I would have you do so. I mean, just to use that term is kind of horrific and frightening unto itself. Before we take that break, I do want to say it's time to support Infowars.com. Obviously, they, and I mean they, have been through a lot in the past, not only year, but several years, hanging on by the skin, I'll not only say of his teeth, but by their nuts. And I hope they're coming back stronger than ever. So InfoWarsStore.com, get the books, get the supplements. We'll be back with this Bannon trailer after this. And we are back. It is the Alex Jones Show. Folks, I know that we've been focusing on Virginia Giuffre Roberts, those documents, but there's other documents out there and other eyewitness testimony as the victims with Jeffrey Epstein. I mean, when you look at just the public ones, you literally are talking about in the hundreds publicly. I mean, even when they quote unquote arrested the guy and he was spending time in jail, he was leaving on almost a daily basis. In fact, a private investigator would follow him. He was able to go into other private residences, and he was visited by young women, possibly even girls, as the investigator was not able to confirm what their ages are. Again, all this stuff in the public arena. Now, on top of that, when you look at another victim, Sarah Ronsom, now, she claims to not only have watched some of the videotapes of his wealthy friends having sex with female victims for blackmail, but says that she actually has copies stashed. And she is another one of the more named, aka more prominent victims in this case. So look, I'm waiting for all this stuff. I think it's extremely important that we get it. But let's go to this trailer of Jeffrey Epstein and let him tell you for himself that he had, quote unquote, islands of what? Islands of Dr. Moreau.
Month marks 2 years since the death of convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein inside a New York City jail.
We were underage. We were little girls. By the time I was 16, I brought him up to 75 girls.
And he lived essentially like he was Gatsby. He was an absolutely terrifying person to encounter.
You own an island, right?
Two. Thank you very much.
Two islands, the islands of Dr. Moreau?
Correct.
Jeffrey Epstein was a billionaire New York businessman whose vast wealth brought an arrogance that knew no limits. He acted as if he could have anything he craved.
Reporting the FBI is now looking into how it can interview Britain's Prince Andrew over his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein.
I made my living from old thinking, but the future is for the way women think.
The way women think.
That's correct.
Is that not a sop because of all the depravity you've done against young women? And your new sop is that their women's thinking is the future?
No, I've always believed that women would in fact be able to take over. I'm a firm believer and supporter of Time's Up.
Federal prosecutors said yesterday video of Epstein's jail cell when he made his first suicide attempt no longer exists.
And Jeffrey Edward Epstein.
Have you ever been convicted of a crime?
Yes.
Epstein got away with his crimes because nearly every element of society allowed him to get away with them.
This morning, we're learning new details of the exact cause of death of former registered sex offender and financier Jeffrey Epstein.
The greatest threat to people put in solitary confinement is they try to kill themselves. Imagine that. You're only in a room for 24 hours, you start to go crazy.
So there it is. That is the trailer for The Monsters. I'm going to shift gears. Although I don't think that we're shifting gears far because, again, the baby-making ranch, the islands of Dr. Moreau. At the end of the day, what are we talking about? We're talking about eugenics. And there's a book that we're going to get back to. This is by Martine Rothblatt, formerly Martin Rothblatt. This is from 1997. Unzipped Genes, Taking Charge of Baby Making in the New Millennium. And this person is going to come into play after we play this rather long clip of Vivek Ramaswamy giving his answer to my question at a town hall. And look, I like a lot of what Vivek is doing, and I'm very encouraged that he has brought many of these issues to the forefront. But as always, we should ask relevant questions of everybody out there, especially those that are seeking power.
Thank you for coming out today, guys. God bless you. God bless your families. And may God bless our United States of America. We're just getting warmed up. We're going to practice what we preach a little bit. We're not going to stop in this race till we get this job done. I want to open this up. I want to have a conversation. Take the filters off. If I'm going to sit across the table from Xi Jinping, and I will, I better be willing to sit across the table from our own fellow citizens in this country. And so, I don't know if we got a microphone. We got a couple of them. Let's open this up. So we'll go to you.
Should I wait for the mic or?
You seem like you got it built in.
I
you can give
do.
him one.
I don't necessarily need a mic. You come from a. Here, I'll take it.
You can go give it to everybody.
Thank you. I appreciate that. You come from a background in biotech, and basically right now we're at a point where United Therapeutics, for instance, has gotten the FDA approval on xenotransplantation. How far is too far with transhumanism? And then the head of that company is a person by the name of Martine Rothblatt. Used to be Martin Rothblatt. Also the most powerful transgender person on the planet. They're the author of Virtually Human, Unzipped Genes, and From Transgender to Transhuman. Now, I see transgenderism as a pathway to transhumanism. I'd love to get your take on that.
Yeah, I mean, this is, I got to say, this is the first on the campaign trail. I like this, though. I like going into new territory. So, you're right, my background was developing medicines. I oversaw the development of a number of medicines, 5 of which are FDA approved today. The one I'm most proud of is life-saving therapy in kids, actually. 20 kids a year are born with a genetic disease where 100% of those kids die by the age of 3. I worked on a therapy, I had the honor of working on a therapy where a majority of those kids now live lives of a normal duration. Another one for prostate cancer, another for endometriosis and uterine fibroids, women's health conditions that were ignored by much of Big Pharma. So that was my background. But I'll actually take you back to the question about the chimera, which is part animal, part human. My senior thesis in college, actually, in 2007, was about the ethics of creating human-animal chimeras. And the core conclusion I came to is, and that was at the embryonic stage, whenever something assumes the qualities of humanity, that's when it creates fundamental ethical quandaries we don't necessarily want to cross. And so I think sometimes what's happened is we're pushing the boundaries, not because that's necessary, but for the sake of pushing those boundaries. And I don't think that that's pro-human. And whether you're talking about this issue or whether you're talking about even very different issues, like the anti-fossil fuel agenda as it relates to the climate agenda, I think the question we should be asking isn't, are you measuring carbon dioxide emissions? Or are you measuring some quality of what percentage of human cells or not? The question we should be asking is, what advances human prosperity? What advances American prosperity as an American? But what advances human prosperity? That's the question we should be asking. And I think that that's what's going to guide us going forward as well. As it relates to the transgender point, I think these are, I know the word trans is in both, but I think they're basically 2 different subjects. But since you brought about it, I think it's worth touching on. I know this is a little controversial for me to say, but I'm going to share with you my view. I think that transgenderism, especially in young people, it's a mental health disorder. It's been treated that way for most of our national history, and I don't think it is compassionate to affirm that kid's confusion. Usually when a young person is saying that, hey, my biological sex doesn't match my gender, what they're really saying is, I need some help. I'm going through a difficult time. Figure out, you're allowed to ask what's going wrong, but today, in today's culture, you're taught, no, you're transphobic if you ask that question. I met 2 young women in this, I can't speak to the individual you mentioned, but I met about what the circumstances were or gender conversion or anything else, but I met 2 young women in this race. They're in their 20s now. Both of them had double mastectomies. both their breasts cut off. Another one of them had a hysterectomy when they were teenagers. Now in their 20s, they regret it. I think it's barbaric that we allowed that to happen. That's not compassion, that is cruelty, to affirm a kid's confusion. And so I think sometimes you have to speak the truth, not just when it's easy, but when it's hard. There is such a thing as objective truth. And I think the more we start wavering from our commitment to truth, the more lost we are in that wilderness. So you see, I think, as many of you know, I'm Hindu, but I went to a Catholic high school. I can tell you from, and I'm proud of my faith, and I'm happy to talk about that. But I think that our shared foundational values actually overlap heavily with the Judeo-Christian values this nation was founded on. But the thing I was going to bring up was actually a reference from the book of Exodus, where when the Israelites are lost in the desert, yet to find the promised land, that's when they say, we want to go back and be ruled by the Pharaoh. So in some sense, that's what I see in America right now, is we're lost in that wilderness, yet to find a promised land. And when you have a hole the size of God in your heart, another scientist said this actually, Blaise Pascal, if you have a hole the size of God in your heart and God doesn't fill it, something else will instead. Right? You don't pledge allegiance to that flag. You're going to quite literally pledge allegiance to a different flag instead. That's where the trans flag came from. It's out of a human need to believe in something bigger than ourselves. And I think the right way we win is we dilute a lot of that to irrelevance by reviving the real thing: individual, family, nation, God. And as the U.S. president, my job is to revive our national identity. I believe that's half the job of the U.S. president, not just policy, but to stand for our national character. And I think that dilutes a lot of these other temptations to irrelevance. And so that's where I stand. Great question here, man. I appreciate you being here.
Well, let's just talk about that for a second. Now, number one, I'm 6 years older than Vivek Ramaswamy, but I appreciate the young man comment. I totally and completely agree that when you do have a hole in your heart, whether it be for God or really humanity in general, when you're looking for something, when you're not comfortable with who you are and what you stand for, when you're constantly confused because of the barrage of misinformation, disinformation, garbage culture, garbage in, garbage out, you are going to go in those directions. Now, let's take it all the way back to xenotransplantation for a moment. For those that are unfamiliar, United Therapeutics has now gotten the FDA approval now for some time, maybe close to 2 years, in which organs are being developed for different types of failures, whether they be your pancreas, kidney, or even skin. Now, I'm all for that which empowers humanity. In the sense that, yes, technology is a double-edged sword. Now, we have to agree on that. Now, I have not yet read his thesis on chimeras, but the question is, when is it too far? I would already argue that this country and many others through black programs have gone much farther than we can now imagine. I often reference, for instance, Annie Jacobson's book, Area 51, in which her explanation for the Roswell crash is that Stalin was able to get a hold of a team of brothers, the quote-unquote Horton brothers, the people that really brought us the stealth type technology. They're the ones that invented the flying wing all the way back in the 40s, and they were able to create quote-unquote UFOs. She then goes on from her source to say that Stalin was also able to get Mengele. Well, a lot of these Nazi scientists, the ones that didn't get absorbed into paperclip, absolutely did escape to South America, and absolutely even Russia was divvying up who they could get in their own type of paperclip programs. And she says that basically the quote-unquote aliens that we saw were genetically modified humans, ones that were taking that appearance. Now, you can dismiss that, but the response to why we didn't blow the whistle on that and explain it is because, quote unquote, we were doing it too. Now, if this has been taking place now for the better part of almost a century, how far are they? How far have they gone And why hasn't the vast majority of humanity benefited from these programs? Now let's take a look at Martine Rothblatt, who owns that company, United Therapeutics. And here's where we're going to make that link a little bit more prevalent and a little bit stronger. Martine, in 2012, actually authored this book that we're going to go to right here. It is From Transgender to Transhuman, a manifesto on the freedom of form. Now, to Martine Rothblatt, this indeed is a pathway. And before we let Martine talk about transgenderism into transhumanism themselves, I'd like to point out just some of the outright similarities. Number one, you are to reject your biology. That's the biggest thing with this gender movement, is that you are fluid. And therefore, your identity is no longer based in reality, let alone your biological reality. They continue, and when I say they, I mean the mainstream media, politicians, popular culture, to push a quote-unquote metaverse. Billions upon billions upon billions have been thrust into this system that is being promoted by the WEF and other globalist organizations. It has not turned any type of a profit. People are being fired left and right. And guess what? The stock continues to go up because this is part of the plan. They want you to identify as a leprechaun riding on a unicorn over a rainbow of sunshine and gold, folks, and believing that's closer to reality, because they want you to disassociate from what? Your humanity in general. And that is why this is so important, because once we no longer have actual biological roles in society, and they tell you you can create your own biology, and you can merge with machines on top of that and identify as anything in these virtual wonderverses, well, they'll also try to convince you to euthanize yourself and upload your consciousness while they experiment on us and try to attain what? Biological immortality. But let's start here. Let's go to the Transformers conference with Martine Rothblatt, kind of joking about their role in this LGBTQ movement and community.
Is also the recipient of this year's Billie Jean King Leadership Initiative Award, which is devoted to LBGT issues, and puts her in an interesting issue because she has a company, or part of the company is based in North Carolina, which, as you know right now, she might get arrested for going to the bathroom if the governor had anything to do about it. Ladies and gentlemen, Martine Rothblatt. Martine, one of the basic concepts that you're interested in, it's not just improving life, but it's actually immortality, that we're all going to live forever. And Martine, I might mention, has founded a religion, as one does, known as Terrasim. It's based on transhumanism. And you have the...
So again, going back to Vivek Ramaswamy and what he was talking about and the quote-unquote transgender flag and believing in something else when you have that God-sized hole in your heart, well, think about what was just said there. Terrasim is a real thing, and it is also predicated on Martine Rothblatt digitally duplicating, creating a digital doppelganger, which Martine will get into, of their wife, which they stayed with, and creating a automated robot that hopefully one day in their vision will pass the Turing test, called Bina 48. But let's continue.
Idea that we're not just going to live a long time, but we're all going to live forever. Tell us your concept of immortality and how that actually would work.
Thanks, Neely. It's a great pleasure to be here. The idea is one that has been percolating up from lots of people in the information technology industry for a while. Perhaps Ray Kurzweil, who is a prolific inventor, is best known for the idea that as our abilities in the information processing industry, computer software, storage of more and more of our thoughts and our ideas outside of our body becomes easier, more automatic, less expensive, that ultimately we're going to have sort of digital doppelgangers of ourselves that are stored in the cloud and are able to present themselves to any manner of devices. And that as thousands and thousands of software coders and hackers and people in the maker movement work to make the software that runs these digital doppelgangers ever more lifelike, ever more human-like, there'll come sort of a tipping point when people begin to claim that these digital doppelgangers have achieved what we call consciousness, an ability to have a sense of themselves, hopes, fears, and feelings. And at that point, I think the activity will move to the legal arena as to whether or not these digital doppelgangers really are conscious, really do have an independent legal identity. And kind of the trend of progressive thinking is once there's a scientific consensus, and in this case it would be the science of psychology, that being the science of the mind, that these digital doppelgangers are in fact cyber-conscious, then they'll begin to acquire the sorts of rights and protections that we assign to even our pets, laboratory animals, and to quite a high extent to primates like chimpanzees. And so in this way, ourselves will kind of morph into a sort of digital consciousness that is recognized by the law.
A digital consciousness that is recognized by the law, but don't think that they're going to stop there. At this same conference, again, this is all the way back in 2016, an individual who has already gone through some of the most bizarre transhumanist surgery that I've ever seen, Neil Harbison, talks about how, well, you can become trans species, and just like these transgender operations were going on in the 40s and 50s and 60s underground and became more mainstream, this will as well.
But that humans don't have. So we are in a stage in history that we can actually design what species we want to be. I consider myself a trans species because I'm adding senses and organs that other species have. And you can add many, many more senses that other species have and organs that other species have. And we'll start seeing this in the 20s because it's now growing. It's happening underground. There's already many surgeons that are willing to do the surgery anonymously in the same way that in the 50s and 60s, transgender operations were being done a bit underground. Now cyborg surgeries are being done a bit underground. But in the end, bioethical committees will also accept that cyborg surgeries should be allowed for everyone that wants to extend their perception of reality, at least to the level of.
In the end, we will just all accept it. That's what is absolutely going on right now. And it's not a slow crawl anymore. All right? The movement into digital currency, into blockchain slavery. Look, I'm not against Bitcoin. I saw Max Kaiser on here earlier in the week. I'm interested in El Salvador. I'm interested in decentralization. But guess what? The blockchain has already been utilized by the IMF and the World Bank to create blockchain people. We got just enough time to show you this video as well. So this is a refugee camp that's running on the blockchain, everybody. And basically, you have your biometrics scanned into cameras. This was beta tested during the War of Terror. And now you're in the World Food Program account. And don't worry, they're going to find you all work while you sleep on the ground and have your identity confirmed. And it has all your different types of records, your passports, your exam certificates, and your financial history, not to mention your biological information. And more areas than ever are being destroyed. So hey, this will go on right now. And don't worry, it's going to cut out a lot of those banking transaction fees. So blockchain people are a reality right now. And that's what blockchain people look like. Take a hard look. No need for cash or a bank account or owning anything. You'll own, this is literally from the same people that told you you will own nothing and be happy. See how happy you're going to be on the ground in a refugee camp with your biometrics being scanned and the promise of digital immortality? Give me a break, folks. It's Team Humanity over here. I want to thank you, and I want to thank Alex Jones for giving me the opportunity to do the 4th hour. I will be back, I guess, tomorrow to discuss the Epstein case in much more depth. And folks, I promise you, I'm going to have a lot more articles, a lot more slides, a lot more information than we even went over today. That's why Infowars.com is the most, if not one of the most, probably the most important media outlet out there, at least of my generation. So please consider supporting it over at InfoWarsStore.com. Go check out the books and supplements. And folks, remember, it is not about left or right. It is always about right and wrong. I absolutely love you guys. And you can check me out on the flip side over at ampnews.us. Thanks for having me.